Good morning, students, staff, and families. Please rise for the national anthems of Nicaragua and the United States. Please be seated. Hello, my name is Maria Fernanda Pertz.
And my name is Alan Serna, and we're Masters of Ceremony. We welcome you to TEDx Youth ANS.
This year's theme is Reboot.
Reebok, I should have brought my kicks.
Holy crap, cousin, with a T.
Oh, that makes more sense. Silly me.
This year's concept is inspired by new beginnings. For example, if you, Alan, were to redo your application process, you could have probably have gotten into UF.
Yay, acabame, pues.
Before starting this event, there are some rules we need to follow. First of all, please turn your electronic devices to airplane mode while inside the facility. Please switch off ringers or any other distractions that might divide your attention. In order to honor the speaker's tremendous dedication to prepare and deliver their big ideas, please do not leave your seats unless it is an emergency while a talk is in progress. In the event of any emergency that causes you to leave the theater, our volunteer staff, wave to the public volunteer staff, can assist you and will hold you outside the door until the talk in progress has finished. Thank you in advance for understanding and respecting this norm. As the events will be recorded and published by TED, we ask you that please refrain from flash photography and video recording. It's normal to be nervous, just as everyone in this auditorium is excited to be here. If you see that a speaker stops or gets flustered during his or her talk, allow them to get back in the group by recognizing such tremendous work and effort.
This brings us to the introduction of TEDx. Sit back and absorb this organization's goals and purpose.
From Kenya to Colombia, from Iraq to Korea, in slums, in schools, in prisons, and in theaters. Every day, people gather at TEDx events around the world to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. Today, you are part of a global conversation about our shared future. So what is this TEDx? TEDx is an initiative of the TED Conference, a nonprofit devoted to ideas worth spreading. We grant free licenses to allow TED-like events to spread globally. This event today is based on the TED Conference format and ideals, but is independently organized by your local community. So please make sure to thank the team of volunteers who worked so hard on today's event. It's their ideas, dedication, and time that made it all possible. It's they who booked all the speakers, and the views you'll hear today are, of course, those of those speakers, not necessarily of TED's. But we hope their talks spark an exciting conversation among you. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for openness and for critical thinking, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you'll take out. And now, on with the show.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Isabella Deschon from the productions team. Now, on part of the TEDx leaders part, we would like to thank you for all being here at such an early hour. We have been preparing this event for all year. These speakers have been putting a lot of passion and dedication and hard work into their talks. So we really hope you enjoy this. And we would like to thank you for bringing us the opportunity to share these ideas and our passions to the community and to the world. Thank you.
Now, the time we have all been waiting for. Our first speaker, Pablo Lacayo. This guy is passionate about politics, a hardline political junkie. He has read Reagan's to Bush's biographies. He will talk to us about why political involvement is important.
Yes, he will tell us about the importance of politics and how ordinary citizens can play an important role in them.
Would you please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Pablo Lacayo?
What does it take to make a change? Change is the effect of action, not a product of idleness. Things won't just fall into place magically, but instead require the joint effort of everybody involved to make sure it gets done. But where do you, as an individual, fit in this picture? Clearly, some of you may think that acting up and speaking up simply isn't for you. Someone else can do it, we all think, simultaneously, and before we know it, nobody is. We can't let our own personal sovereignty be taken away by somebody else, and instead must actively work together to make sure that we are the owners of the change around us. Where can change be applied? At a glance, I'm sure everybody has something that they would like to change about themselves, their surroundings, and just their life in general. But moving beyond the personal level and transitioning into the world as a whole, there's one true playing field where transformations are needed the most. If you haven't guessed where I'm going by now, I'm talking about politics. The dictionary defines politics as the actions taken between individuals to take control of a country. And moving beyond that, beyond the theatrics, the spectacle, and the self-imposed unnecessary complications, that's all there's to it. This is something that affects all of us, no matter our age, race, religion, or sex. At times, politics may seem distant, far removed from our day-to-day lives. But the hard truth is that the actions of politicians end up affecting us more than we realize and perhaps shape our future more than we would like. After all, The government is the one in charge of passing new laws and implementing new regulations. In the lead up to this TED Talk, I sent out a survey to secondary students here at ANS, and 74% of the respondents indicated that they had little to no interest in politics. Indifference translates into inaction. That's why it's important to get involved, now more than ever. Anybody who knows me well knows that I'm in love with politics, and that my passion for it has been there since the very beginning. In fact, here I am in 2011, barely 9 years old at the time, at a political rally here in Managua. My political involvement has been there forever, and I have been active in political campaigns as a volunteer here in Nicaragua for the 2011, 2016, and 2017 elections, going to several neighborhoods around Managua to get out the vote. One thing has become clear to me throughout all these years. Although participating in a political process might not always be pretty or even safe, its importance and relevance lies in the fact that it gives you a platform to voice your thoughts and opinions, as well as an opportunity to mix and mingle with those who think the same way you do. How can others know what you're thinking if you choose not to speak up? I'm sure some people think that this wouldn't be consequential at all, and that life would go on as usual. But that's a misleading premise. If people disconnected themselves from politics, their voices would disappear. If we don't speak up, our voices won't get heard, and our demands would sink into oblivion. At the end of the day, getting involved in politics isn't as hard as it seems. All I had to do was reach out to some people I knew, message pages I had liked on Facebook, and I was already in. Getting involved in politics doesn't mean becoming president or a congressperson. Political involvement can be that, yes, but it can also be as simple as sharing a post on Facebook or liking something on Instagram. To be involved means to be informed and to know what's going on. Being an informed citizen is the first step into active political involvement. Don't let your social media be flooded by things that don't really impact your life. Social media shouldn't always just be an escape from reality, but instead a window of opportunity that will let you take in the knowledge necessary to know what is going on in the world around you. If you use it right, it will most definitely open up your world to political involvement. At the end of the day, massive political involvement has been one of the most consequential agents of change in a society. In a democratic country, it allows the political elite to know what's going on. And this is extremely important when developing policy, because when they know what the people want, they're going to have to deliver on it. This is a cornerstone of modern democracy, and there are several examples of it all over history. What do important political leaders of the past, like Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama, all have in common? It's simple. Their political campaigns were fueled by a motivated and energized base who was committed to seeing change get delivered. Clinton and Obama went from being considered outsiders in their party to leading it to consecutive landslide victories. On the other hand, Ronald Reagan is a clear example on how active political participation can change the face of a political party, while Thatcher's example teaches us that an active political base can completely transform the makeup of a country's political and economic system. But as we all know, not every country in the world operates as a perfect democracy. In fact, according to last year's EIU report, there are only 19 full democracies in the world today. Some people may think that change can only come about when in full democracy, but that's misleading. There are still examples in history and around the world today that prove that change can still come about despite adverse conditions. Let's take a look at a country in particular, South Africa. In the 19th century, South Africa was colonized by the British, and after gaining its independence at the start of the 20th century, the country's white minority took over government, effectively silencing the black majority's voice. This legal regime became known as apartheid, And after lasting for over 4 decades, it is now remembered as one of the most brutal and horrific chapters in South African history. Nowadays, Nelson Mandela is remembered as one of the greatest statesmen, not only of the past century, but of our time. However, what if Nelson Mandela would have just accepted apartheid and bowed down to the South African government's cruel push to suppress non whites? What if the country ever transitioned into the enfranchising multiracial democracy it is today? I wouldn't think so. His tenacity, his courage, and his push to rally people against apartheid is what led to its eventual demise. South Africa didn't transition from being a white supremacist state by chance. Instead, it was the product of an entire country banding together, articulating their interest, and fighting to right a terrible wrong. South Africa's example teaches us that leadership can still come about despite unjust conditions, because it is this injustice that leads people to act. This injustice is what leads people to speak up and fight to make what they think is wrong right. Last year, the United States held a presidential election. And despite the fact that it was considered one of the most important presidential elections in recent American history, I wouldn't call it the most adequate example of political involvement, because spite, hatred, and divisiveness all motivated the campaign. However, last year's elections paint a much prettier picture. The 2018 midterms are a perfect example on how when people vote, their voices get heard. These elections weren't motivated from top to bottom, but instead from bottom to top. The people were energized, motivated, and willing to pursue their authentic political desires. This led to several political firsts, and the United States Congress became much more representative of the country as a whole. As a matter of fact, American voters elected the youngest woman to Congress, the first Muslim American Congress people, and the first Native American representatives. And in races all throughout the country, racial and gender hegemony caved into a new vision of America, an inclusive America, an America where people aren't left out by the color of their skin, but instead included by the valuable contributions they seek to make to their society. This just rings true the fact that when people vote, their voices get heard, because the people that get elected are people that legitimately represent them. At the end of the day, as I already said, political involvement isn't as difficult as it seems. Today, when you go home, maybe watch the news, like a local politician's Facebook page, and read up on the issues that affect your community today. Although these might not seem like the most consequential steps to take, they're baby steps. And as high school students, they're still significant. When you're underage, you may be too young to vote or to be an active politician, but you're never too young to spread awareness and help build the future you want for yourself and your country. Does it matter that whatever you post or share only gets a couple of likes? Not really. Information isn't a race for likes. Quality discussion is better than shallow agreement, and sharing knowledge allows us to engage in conversations that turn out to be beneficial to society because they make us think. If we don't talk about the problems we face as a community, then they will never be solved. Use the platforms available to you to become more aware of the world around you and invite others to do the same thing as well. You can also participate in other activities, activities that build on activism and reflect the building blocks towards political involvement. Here at ANS, we have DALE, we have Asset Democracy, we have TEDx, and countless other clubs and organizations that seek to incorporate students into society by making them think and get involved with the issues and challenges that press our community today. You can also seek out other platforms, like the school newspaper, which allows you to share the stories that matter and learn more about what's going on all over the world. Is it hard to get involved in these? Not really. You just need to have the willingness and the passion to go beyond your boundaries and grow as an individual. Back in 9th grade, I was persuaded to join that year's DALE Congress, and I was reluctant at first. I didn't know whether I could make it or survive. But once I had entered a world where I could be with people who shared the same interest I had, who I could talk with the same things I believed in, my excitement only grew. And I became happier at the prospect of one day being actively involved in a political process. So get out there, get involved, and become a builder of the future you want to see for yourself. Don't wait for someone else to come into your life and change it. If you do that, you'd only be putting yourself at risk by enabling others to do the decisions you should be doing for yourself. Don't be a bystander, be a doer. Don't just observe, instead, act. Overcome your fears and anxieties, own your voice, and transform yourself into the change you want to see happen inside your community. We wonder why no one else is changing the world, yet we often fail to realize that we are the very agents of change we desire. Any kind of change is possible. We just have to rise up to the challenge as individuals in a society and as a society to make that change a reality. Nothing is beyond reach if we set our hearts to it. So the next time you think someone else can do it, keep in mind that that someone should be you. Thank you. Cool.
'Great job, Paulo. You never cease to impress the ANS community. This reminds me, I'm 16. That means I can vote. I'll build the future I want for my country.
It's like you took the words out of my mouth.
Please sit back and listen carefully to the strong Arab woman, Bahaya Shahab, who will inspire us with her experience and explain the significance behind 1,000 times no.
2 years ago, I was invited as an artist to participate in an exhibition commemorating 100 years of Islamic art in Europe. The curator had only one condition. I had to use the Arabic script for my artwork. Now, as an artist, a woman, an Arab, or a human being living in the world in 2010, I only had one thing to say. I wanted to say no. And in Arabic, to say no, we say no and 1,000 times no. So I decided to look for 1,000 different no's on everything ever produced under Islamic or Arab patronage in the past 1,400 years, from Spain to the borders of China. I collected my findings in a book, placed them chronologically, stating the name, the patron, the medium, and the date. Now, the book sat on a small shelf next to the installation, which stood 3 by 7 meters in Munich, Germany, in September of 2010. Now, in January 2011, the revolution started and life stopped for 18 days. And on the 12th of February, we naively celebrated on the streets of Cairo, believing that the revolution had succeeded. 9 months later, I found myself spraying messages in Tahrir Square. The reason for this act was this image that I saw in my newsfeed. I did not feel that I could live in a city where people were being killed and thrown like garbage on the street. So I took one no of a tombstone from the Islamic Museum in Cairo and I added a message to it: no to military rule. And I started spraying that on the streets in Cairo. But that led to a series of no coming out of the book like ammunition and adding messages to them, and I started spraying them on the walls. So I'll be sharing some of these no's with you. No to a new pharaoh, because whoever comes next should understand that we will never be ruled by another dictator. No to violence. Rami Aissam came to Tahrir on the second day of the revolution, and he sat there with his guitar singing. 1 month after Mubarak stepped down, this was his reward. No to blinding heroes. Ahmad Harara lost his right eye on the 28th of January, and he lost his left eye on the 19th of November by 2 different snipers. No to killing, in this case, no to killing men of religion, because Sheikh Ahmad al-Din Affat was shot on December 16th during a demonstration, leaving behind 3 orphans and a widow. No to burning books. The Institute of Egypt was burnt on December 17th, a huge cultural loss. No to stripping the people, and the blue bra is to remind us of our shame as a nation when we allow a veiled woman to be stripped and beaten on the street. And the footprint reads, "Long live a peaceful revolution," because we will never retaliate with violence. No to barrier walls. On February 5th, concrete roadblocks were set up in Cairo to protect the Ministry of Defense from protesters. Now, speaking of walls, I want to share with you the story of one wall in Cairo. A group of artists decided to paint a life-size tank on a wall. It's 1-to-1. In front of this tank, there's a man on a bicycle with a bread basket on his head. To any passerby, there's no problem with this visual. After acts of violence, another artist came, painted blood, protesters being run over by the tank, demonstrators, and a message that read, "Starting tomorrow, I wear the new face, the face of every martyr. I exist." Authority comes, paints the wall white, leaves the tank, and adds a message. "Army and people, one hand. Egypt for Egyptians." Another artist comes, paints the head of the military as a monster eating a maiden in a river of blood in front of the tank. Authority comes, paints the wall white, leaves the tank, leaves the suit, and throws a bucket of black paint just to hide the face of the monster. So I come with my stencils and I spray them on the suit, on the tank, and on the whole wall. And this is how it stands today until further notice. Now, I want to leave you with a final no. I found Neruda scribbled on a piece of paper in a field hospital in Tahrir. And I decided to take a note of Mamluk Mausoleum in Cairo. The message reads, "يمكنك أن تدهس الورود لكنك لا تستطيع أن تؤخر الربيع." You can crush the flowers, but you can't delay spring. Thank you. Thank you. شكراً.
That surely gave the word no a whole new meaning.
Definitely. Coming up is our first breakout session. A TEDx breakout session is an opportunity to dive deeper into a speaker's main ideas. Please welcome TEDx volunteer Sofia Argenial, who will lead this activity.
Hi, my name is Sofia Argenial, and I will be leading the first breakout session. No to is a way to stand up for wrong acts. We will pass out papers and feel free to say no to something you do not agree with. This is an anonymous act in support of those who suffer from inequality in this world. Feel free to share your ideas with people around you to spark a conversation. When you're done, please hand out the papers back to the closest TEDx member. We will pin your papers on a bulletin board outside so you can check them out later. Any questions? Thank you.
Okay. This was a great opportunity to recognize the world's problems and understand how we can improve society.
Our next speaker is Veronica Lanusa. We will listen to her talk about unhealthy habits
What?
and how every small decision will impact our lives.
To get some insight into the topic, let's welcome Veronica Lanusa.
The blood stops flowing through your veins. Your heart accelerates, and then suddenly comes to a frigid stop in your chest. In the United States, every 40 seconds, someone has a heart attack. Are you shocked? Maybe, but not shocked enough to hesitate when you eat your next meal. Are you maybe planning to eat a pizza or a hamburger? Are you conscious that you're about to experience immediate artery inflammation, increasing your risk of a heart attack by 60%, which might become the reason for your death? Now, how many of you would leave? Wait 40 seconds. A person just had a heart attack. Now, how many of you would leave this room if I told you I were to talk about nutrition? I figured. Now, Nicaragua is still a developing country, meaning that it's not completely dependent or certain about everything it currently adopts. One of those aspects is its fast food chains. My dad is an incredibly intelligent and dedicated father. Sometime in May of 2018, he started feeling pain in his chest after exercising or walking small distances, which was rare. After visiting a local doctor, it was determined that it would be better if he went to Miami to further explore and treat the case. At this point, they knew it was not a benign issue. My dad was told that several of his most important arteries were clogged, meaning that it was extremely hard for the blood to get to his heart. But let me explain what all these technicalities mean. According to the American Heart, Blood, and Lung Institute, arteries are blood vessels that carry oxygen-rich blood to your heart and other parts of your body. However, buildup of fat, cholesterol, and other substances that together are called plaques clog the arteries and slow blood flow, which is a process known as atherosclerosis. To unclog these, doctors place stents, which are tubular support temporarily placed inside a blood vessel, canal, or duct to aid healing or relieve an obstruction. Nevertheless, if the damage is too serious, bypass surgery is the sole option, which is an open heart surgery where a surgeon uses blood vessels from another area of your body to repair the damaged coronary arteries, which are the most important ones. Before knowing this, I asked my dad, is it going to be open heart surgery? To which he responded, no, not at all, with an expression in his face showing that the idea was nothing but ridiculous. My parents stayed in Miami for 3 weeks, came back, and we thought everything had gone back to normal. But later, in mid-September, the chest pain came back. This time, my dad had to undergo bypass surgery. Something that we once thought out of the realm of possibility was now a frightening reality. My dad was going to receive open heart surgery. We tend to treat chronic illnesses or illnesses in general as an abstract subject. We hear these stories and we think, pity, that must be terrible, and then carry on with our lives. So many of us never truly understand that what happened to my dad can happen to any of us. We never stop to realize that our choices make our habits, and in turn, habits make us. Now let's analyze this. Why did my dad almost suffer a heart attack and evidently go through a bypass surgery? Because of this, and this. Your mind says this, but your body feels this. Part of the reason was his genetics, but for the most part, because of the most horrid eating ever seen. Let me just put it like this. In college, my dad did not really appreciate cooking, and it also had to be cheap. So the only option, fast food. What a beautiful day it would be to feed your artery inflammation by starting with no breakfast, eating a pizza for a snack, getting the greasiest burgers and fries from McDonald's, And to end with a gold medal, one entire box of the cheesiest pizza for dinner. The irony here is that my dad is not as old as most people who receive this surgery. He's only 43 years old. This illustrates how his nutrition impacted his health. It all goes back to the choice, the decision on what is better for us. Decisions shape who we are. They constitute what we do and why we do it. They shape who we really are. They shape our personality and our habits. Now, that was only my dad's story, but did you know that 1 out of every 4 deaths in the United States is caused by heart attacks, of which obesity has been the major factor? Now, let's analyze this. The food industry is driven by marketing, one that fools you to buy any kind of product. How many of us have gone into a store and seen a Burger King ad saying 30% less calories in our fries and immediately think, oh, well, I'll get them, they're healthier now. But if you really get close and read the details, it says 30% less calories than McDonald's fries. This shameless marketing is producing a variety of consequences in the structure of our society. According to the State of Obesity Organization, the percentage of obesity found in preschoolers is 14.5%, compared to 15.1% in high schoolers. Does this not sufficiently illustrate how it is the youngest generation, the ones suffering the most from this eating habit epidemic? How is it possible that the ratio of obese children to obese high schoolers is the same? It is when children are young that they start to form habits, habits that will stay with them forever. The older children get, the harder it becomes to convince them and teach them about self-care if they have already grown accustomed to a certain lifestyle. An article on brain development stated that a young child's daily experiences determine which brain connections develop and which will last for a lifetime. The amount and quality of care, stimulation, interaction during their early years makes all the difference. The exponential increase of the brain size during this phase makes it increasingly relevant for healthy habits to be formed. But why do we continue to indulge in fast food if we know that it's detrimental for our bodies? Because that's what most studies have shown, and it's because most people have the wrong idea about nutrition. Most of the parents from the following study expressed that they had been convinced by ads from the same fast food chains to buy from a particular restaurant. The University of Connecticut's Rudd Center for Food Policy and Obesity made a study consisting of 800 parents who had bought Burger King or McDonald's in the past year. 91% of parents surveyed in 2016 said that they had bought a meal for their child at one of the 4 largest fast food chains in the past week, compared to 79% in 2010. It's all about habits and those that have been created in our generation towards fast food consumption. Warren Buffett once said about habits, the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they are too heavy to be broken. The habits towards fast food are already in place, but they will soon become too heavy to change them. Of course, you might be thinking, oh no, I ate fried chicken yesterday, I'm dead now. But no, that's not the case. Rare consumption of these foods is not bad. The problem begins when its consumption becomes sustained rather than rare. On a bigger scale now, the fast food industry makes a global income of $507 billion, with 200 only in the United States. The success in this industry is also leading to financial success in the medical industry. As more people suffer from obesity and intense consumption of high sugar and high fat foods, more medications are needed to treat them. Did you know that for a bypass operation, you can pay up to $700,000? So let's see this with numbers. For 3 fast food meals a day, a person will spend $12. That times 365 is equal to 4,380. And that times 30 years is equal to $131,400. Compare this to what you have to pay for any operation. It's conspicuous that the amount of money you have to spend recovering
is far greater than that of what you spend indulging in unhealthy practices. But why should you care about everything I'm telling you? Why should you care about the prevalence of fast food and how it affects health? Let's come to a smaller and more relatable scale now. The United States is a developed country, meaning that its enterprises, which encompass fast food chains, are much more developed and numerous. On the other hand, Nicaragua is a developing country, meaning that its enterprises are also in the developing stage. Most of the countries in Latin America are exposed to heavy influence from the United States, as people from there invest on practices that originated in the United States. Because of this, the amount of fast food in our sector has increased. According to the McDonald's Nicaragua website, the number of McDonald's in 2000 was 1. Now it's 7. Other franchises include Pizza Hut, Carl's Jr., Subway, Quiznos, Buffalo Wings, Carl's Jr., among others. In Nicaragua, another type of fast food is a traditional food, such as fritangas. As a developing nation, we can still avoid it. The habit is still being formed, facilitating change, as opposed to the United States, where the tendency is already established, already plaguing the citizens of the states. In Nicaragua, 30% of the population lives in extreme poverty. Fast food is evidently a viable solution as it is low cost and easily accessible. So how can we change this? First, it all comes with culture. Consciousness about how marketing by corporations is trying to drive our food consumption the wrong way is the first line of defense. Then, awareness on what a healthy diet should be and its implementation in our daily lives. Reducing the consumption of fried foods, fast foods, red meats, and sugars are general guidelines. Increasing the consumption of fruits, vegetables, of white grains, and white meats are easy to remember pointers to develop our food habits. Every time you do something in your life, think about the effect it will have, because it will definitely affect your life. There is no doubt about that. After all, globalization has facilitated the diffusion of these habits. Many of them, such as the mass consumption of fast food, are not the ones we should adopt. There is still hope in our country because if each and every one of us makes a small change to our habits, we will soon be the ones whose habits are being followed. Just in the time I've been speaking, 21 people have had a heart attack. Don't be one of them. Thank you.
Wow, Veronica certainly witnessed the consequences of bad healthy habits. So who's going to change their healthy habits after her talk? After her experience, she came here today showing us that what happened to her can happen to any of us. Alan, you better stop eating sopa maruchan every day.
You're absolutely right. Thank you, Veronica. Now I'm craving a salad. Up next is Regina Franco.
Regina will talk to us about dealing with emotional stress.
This talk could have helped me a couple months ago.
Yes, Regina will talk to us about her personal experiences in coping with her stress and how this impacted her and made her stronger.
We will be learning about different coping mechanisms to deal with emotional stress.
Please put your hands together for Regina Franco.
How many of you have felt burned out or overwhelmed emotionally or mentally in the past month? In the past week? Now I want you to think, were you able to successfully handle these emotions? Were you able to gather yourself and continue with your school, your work, or your life without feeling overpowered by them? Emotions have a way of getting to us in ways which are sometimes hard to comprehend. They serve as powerful means by which we can experience the wonders of this life and relish the beauty of our existence. But they can also render us paralyzed and unable to function. They can make even mundane tasks feel like the end of the world. Negative emotions can be especially crippling when we have neither the tools nor the consciousness to handle them in ways which can alleviate their impact. Before I go any further, I want to establish exactly what constitutes as an emotion. There are many different theories on how to define this, but I want to focus on the cognitive appraisal theory developed by American psychologist Richard Lazarus. This theory states that when an event happens, we evaluate whether it is good or bad first, and then we experience an emotion along with a physiological characteristic. When we take this into account, we can understand that emotional responses to events are subjective. They're often dependent on the experiences that each individual has and how they process said events. So let's say one day you sit in class and are given an exam you've been anticipating for weeks. You turn the paper around and see the set of problems before you. Let's suppose this can go one of two ways. The first one, you assess the situation as being good because you studied for the exam, so you feel confident and your vision focuses. Or two, you assess the situation as being bad because you're not prepared enough, so you feel anxious and your heartbeat quickens. In essence, you first evaluated the situation and then experienced an emotion along with a physical response. Now, certain events in our life can lead to stress, but this isn't inherently negative. Stress simply refers to the response our body has towards taxing or demanding circumstances. Distress refers specifically to the type of stress that causes concern and anxiety, decreases our performance, and can lead to other more severe mental and physical issues. We're all affected differently by situations in our life, and we process distress differently. These emotions can affect us negatively to a great extent, but we need to understand that they do not have to be a burden. But why does any of this matter? We have to consider that depression among adolescents has become more prevalent than ever. According to a 2016 study made by the National Institute of Mental Health, approximately 3.1 million teenagers ages 12 to 17 experienced at least one major depressive episode in the United States. And when we look at the data for adults in Latin America, the numbers are equally as concerning. In 2012, it was reported by the Pan American Health Organization that out of all the adult population in Latin America and the Caribbean who suffer from depression, 60 to 65% of them do not receive care for it. So why do we, as humans who live and breathe and experience complex emotions, think that our mental health is something we can simply ignore? I have personally neglected my mental health in the past, and I will be the first to admit that I don't always handle my negative emotions in the best ways possible. About 2 years ago, I moved here to Nicaragua from Panama. Last school year in particular took a concerning toll on my emotional stability. I felt upset, frustrated, and melancholic. This because I had to leave behind all my friends and a life I had become accustomed to and start all over again in an unknown country where I didn't know what to expect. It was mentally draining and I didn't handle it very well. I tried to ignore these emotions and move past them as soon as I could without taking the time to properly process them in a way that was healthy. This buildup of unattended feelings started showing up in other aspects of my life, in my mood, in my temper, in my grades, in my memory, and in my horrendously irregular sleep schedule. I attempted to balance everything at once, but it wasn't the right way to do so. In retrospect, I see that I neglected this aspect of my life because confronting the fact that I didn't have the proper means to manage it meant that I would have to make a change. But I also came to realize that emotions do not have to overwhelm us to the point of dysfunction because we ultimately have control over how we cope with them. So, given all of this, How can we begin to foster healthy outlooks and relationships with the emotions we experience? It all comes down to the skills we use to manage these feelings. Coping mechanisms are the efforts we employ to handle stressful emotions. But in order to truly better ourselves, we need to learn to differentiate between effective and ineffective methods. Within this context, we can place coping mechanisms into two general categories: adaptive and maladaptive. Adaptive coping allows us to adjust to situations in a way that is healthy. These mechanisms are controlled and they foster functionality. Maladaptive coping is the opposite. It prevents us from properly adapting. They're usually uncontrolled and intensify dysfunctionality. These are just a few examples of maladaptive coping. Sometimes we opt to ignore emotional distress, which falls under the category of avoidance. And avoidance can lead to other, more severe things, like disordered eating, substance or alcohol abuse, and self harm, among other things. There's also rumination, the repetition of thought or fixation on symptoms of our distress, suppression, where we suppress our negative emotions, and self blame, where we blame ourselves for situations that affect us negatively. All of these methods deflect the issue or make it worse without allowing us to properly mend it. In the short term, they may grant us immediate alleviation, but in the long term, they manifest negative habits and dysfunction. Because of this, they must be avoided. A 2016 study published by the Journal of American College Health analyzed the effectiveness of different coping strategies at dealing with interpersonal stress among college students. The results point to three coping mechanisms: avoidance, suppression, and rumination, as being linked to experiencing higher symptoms of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and eating disorders. Another study in the Netherlands, published by the Journal of Adolescence, compared the link between certain coping mechanisms and the experience of symptoms of depression and anxiety in more than 1,000 participants, ranging from high school students to adults. The results showed that teenagers ages 11 to 16 who use strategies such as self blame or rumination experienced higher symptoms of depression and anxiety. These results are incredibly telling. They show us that coping mechanisms play a critical role in our functionality and overall well being. They prove that when we cope with our distress improperly, it makes matters worse. So, if we know all of this, why do we treat our mental and emotional health as secondary or even as a non existing priority in our lives? I experienced the way this poor coping can have an effect on one's well being through the loss of my dog. My family got her when I was just 3 years old, and I can't remember a time when she wasn't around the house following us anywhere we went. I have vivid memories of going to the lake where she would swim out into the water and fetch rocks from the shore, or going to the mountains when she played around in the cold and ate the snow, which we all found incredibly endearing. She lives in the most precious memories of my mind, and I could never imagine what it might be like if she weren't there. In September of 2017, just a month after I arrived to Nicaragua, my dog arrived to the country as well. But she was ill. Her lungs were failing, and she had trouble breathing to the point where she couldn't walk, she couldn't sleep, she couldn't even lie down properly without obstructing her breathing. She was this being whom I loved so deeply, who has filled my earliest memories from childhood, and her condition was slowly deteriorating before me. The 20th of September, with all the pain in the world, we had to put her down. I can't even begin to explain the emotional and ethical turmoil and conflict I experienced. I remember the room was cold, and she lied atop a towel on a metal table facing us. I cried while it happened as I held her in my arms. When it was over, and I didn't stop crying until I fell asleep a couple hours later. The next morning when I woke up, my eyes hurt intensely anytime I blinked, and anytime I shifted my sight. It was devastating for me to deal with it. How does one face events like that? when we lose family pets or loved ones, when we're confronted with hardships outside the realm of death, but equally as overwhelming. How can we begin to process such emotions? Despite not always being able to handle my distress in the best ways possible, I can say that I now have better ways at coping with my emotions than the mechanisms I had been wrongfully employing these years. One night this past summer, when I was struggling to sleep, I began to truly realize how much this poor coping had affected me. I began to notice a shift in my mood and my behavior. I became a lot more distant from my family and disinterested in the things I did inside and outside of school. I came to comprehend that I need to find better ways at dealing with my distress and to identify exactly what was going on. Through a time of introspection and research, I found these following ways that helped me overcome my adversities, methods that allow us to adequately cope. The first step is to always to identify, acknowledge, and accept the fact that we experience negative emotions. A study at UC Berkeley in 2017 assessed the link between psychological well-being and acceptance of negative emotions in more than 1,300 adults. The results showed that those who accepted and allowed themselves to experience their bleak emotions reported less psychological stress than those who didn't acknowledge them or push them away. The attitudes we have towards our distress strongly dictate how we initiate its management. So, whenever we find ourselves dealing with desperation, sadness, or grief, we need to come into terms with those emotions and accept that they're there. And once we do that, we need to learn how to deal with them properly. In cases where taxing events are partially or fully under our control, problem focused coping is essential at solving the issue at hand. This entails that one deals directly with the root cause of the distress by altering or managing the problem at hand. Perhaps you've been struggling with interpersonal relationships in your life, whether they be platonic, romantic, or involving family. If you feel overwhelmed by a strain in your relationship, you can try talking to the person to solve the conflict. You can also try talking to somebody else about it, like a counselor or a therapist that can help you solve the issue. Either ways, by taking the initiative to get to the root cause of the issue, it can help ease the stress. But sometimes events are out of our control, in which case, emotion focused coping is preferable. This constitutes in dealing with emotions that come as a result of the problem, not the actual problem itself. But it's crucial that when we use these methods, that they're done in a way that is conscious, so as to not fall into maladaptive coping, like avoidance or rumination. If you're dealing with the death of somebody you cared about deeply, it would be futile to try and solve the cause of your grief. So instead, you can try channeling your emotions through an activity you enjoy. You can use your personal interests as an outlet to help you bring relief. These things don't solve the issue, but they help in mending the melancholy you feel because of it. Now, I want you to reflect on your own life. Have you been keeping emotions bottled up and unresolved? Have you lived your life not fully knowing how to handle your negative emotions in a way that is healthy? Maybe you simply need a fresh start at dealing with emotional distress. If so, I want you to start by acknowledging it. And yes, it may sound cliche, but acknowledging our shortcomings is always the first step for making genuine progress. Then, I want you to think of the ways that you can deal with it. Analyze whether you're in control of the situation or not, and the options you have available to solve it. And lastly, be introspective. If you find yourself delving into maladaptive coping, stop what you're doing and find out what and how you can change. We aren't always in control of the situations that surround us, and we can't choose the emotional responses that follow. But we are in control of how we handle the obstacles that come our way. You can go the rest of your life without fully knowing how to handle your negative emotions, or you can take control of this aspect for the better. So, next time you find yourself facing emotional distress or stuck in a dire loop of sorrow or anguish, acknowledge your turmoil and take control of how you cope with it. because it's the way that we handle our adversities that determine how they affect us in the end. Thank you.
What a motivational story by Regina. She learned how to handle emotional hardships with her dog's death. How about you, Prima?
Maybe high school relationships.
Okay, awkward.
Now, listen carefully to what Kevin Briggs has to say about the lethal weapon the San Francisco Bridge can be.
I recently retired from the California Highway Patrol after 23 years of service. The majority of those 23 years was spent patrolling the southern end of Marin County, which includes the Golden Gate Bridge. The bridge is an iconic structure known worldwide for its beautiful views of San Francisco, the Pacific Ocean, and its inspiring architecture. Unfortunately, it is also a magnet for suicide, being one of the most utilized sites in the world. The Golden Gate Bridge opened in 1937. Joseph Strauss, chief engineer in charge of building the bridge, was quoted as saying, "The bridge is practically suicide-proof. Suicide from the bridge is neither practical nor probable. But since its opening, over 1,600 people have leapt to their death from that bridge." Some believe that traveling between the two towers will lead you to another dimension. This bridge has been romanticized as such, that the fall from that frees you from all your worries and grief, and the waters below will cleanse your soul. But let me tell you what actually occurs when the bridge is used as a means of suicide. After a free fall of 4 to 5 seconds, the body strikes the water at about 75 miles an hour. That impact shatters bones, some of which then puncture vital organs. Most die on impact. Those that don't generally flail in the water helplessly and then drown. I don't think that those who contemplate this method of suicide realize how grisly a death that they face. This is the cord. Except for around the two towers, there's 32 inches of steel paralleling the bridge. This is where most folks stand before taking their lives. I can tell you from experience that once the person is on that cord and at their darkest time, it is very difficult to bring them back. I took this photo last year as this young woman spoke to an officer contemplating her life. I want to tell you very happily that we were successful that day in getting her back over the rail. When I first began working on the bridge, we had no formal training. You struggled to funnel your way through these calls. This was not only a disservice to those contemplating suicide, but to the officers as well. We've come a long, long way since then. Now, veteran officers and psychologists train new officers. This is Jason Garber. I met Jason on July 22nd of last year when I received a call of a possible suicidal subject sitting on the cord near mid-span. I responded, and when I arrived, I observed Jason speaking to a Golden Gate Bridge officer. Jason was just 32 years old and had flown out here from New Jersey. As a matter of fact, he had flown out here on 2 other occasions from New Jersey to attempt suicide on this bridge. After about an hour of speaking with Jason, he asked us if we knew the story of Pandora's box. Recalling your Greek mythology, Zeus created Pandora and sent her down to earth with a box and told her never, ever open that box. One day, curiosity got the better of Pandora, And she did open the box. Out flew plagues, sorrows, and all sorts of evils against man. The only good thing in the box was hope. Jason then asked us, what happens when you open the box and hope isn't there? He paused a few moments, leaned to his right, and was gone. This kind, intelligent young man from New Jersey had just committed suicide. I spoke with Jason's parents that evening, and I suppose that when I was speaking with them that I didn't sound as if I was doing very well. Because that very next day, their family rabbi called to check on me. Jason's parents had asked him to do so. The collateral damage of suicide affects so many people. I pose these questions to you. What would you do if your family member, friend, or loved one was suicidal? What would you say? Would you know what to say? In my experience, it's not just the talking that you do, but the listening. Listen to understand. Don't argue, blame, or tell the person you know how they feel, because you probably don't. By just being there, you may just be the turning point that they need. If you think someone is suicidal, don't be afraid to confront them and ask the question. One way of asking them the question is like this. Others in similar circumstances have thought about ending their life. Have you had these thoughts? Confronting the person head on may just save their life and being a turning point for them. Some other signs to look for: hopelessness, believing that things are terrible and never going to get better. Helplessness, believing that there's nothing that you can do about it. Recent social withdrawal and loss of interest in life. I came with this talk just a couple of days ago, and I received an email from a lady that I'd like to read you her letter. She lost her son on January 19th of this year. And she wrote me this email just a couple of days ago. And it's with her permission and blessing that I read this to you. Hi, Kevin. I imagine you're at the TED conference. That must be quite the experience to be there. I'm thinking I should go walk the bridge this weekend. Just wanted to drop you a note. Hope you get the word out to many people and they go home talking about it to their friends who tell their friends, etc. I'm still pretty numb, but noticing more moments of really realizing Mike isn't coming home. Mike was driving from Petaluma to San Francisco to watch the 49er game with his father on January 19th. He never made it there. I called Petaluma police and reported him missing that evening. The next morning, 2 officers came to my home and reported that Mike's car was down at the bridge. A witness had observed him jumping off the bridge at 1:58 p.m. the previous day. Thanks so much for standing up for those who may be only temporarily too weak to stand for themselves. Who hasn't been low before without suffering from a true mental illness? It shouldn't be so easy to end it. My prayers are with you for your fight. The GGB, Golden Gate Bridge, is supposed to be a passage across our beautiful bay, not a graveyard. Good luck this week, Vicky. I can't imagine the courage it takes for her to go down to that bridge and walk the path that her son took that day. And also the courage just to carry on. I'd like to introduce you to a man I refer to as hope and courage. On March 11th of 2005, I responded to a radio call of a possible suicidal subject on the bridge sidewalk near the North Tower. I rode my motorcycle down the sidewalk and observed this man, Kevin Berthia, standing on the sidewalk. When he saw me, he immediately traversed that pedestrian rail and stood on that small pipe which goes around the tower. For the next hour and a half, I listened as Kevin spoke about his depression and hopelessness. Kevin decided on his own that day to come back over that rail and give life another chance. When Kevin came back over, I congratulated him. This is a new beginning, a new life. But I asked him, what was it that made you come back and give hope and life another chance? And you know what he told me? He said, you listened. You let me speak, and you just listened. Shortly after this incident, I received a letter from Kevin's mother, and I have that letter with me, and I'd like to read it to you. Dear Mr. Briggs, nothing will erase the events of March 11th, but you are one of the reasons Kevin is still with us. I truly believe Kevin was crying out for help. He has been diagnosed with a mental illness for which he has been properly medicated. I adopted Kevin when he was only 6 months old, completely unaware of any hereditary traits. But thank God, now we know. Kevin is straight, as he says. We truly thank God for you. Sincerely indebted to you, Narvella Berthia. And on the bottom, she writes, P.S. When I visited San Francisco General Hospital that evening, you were listed as the patient. Boy, did I have to straighten that one out. Today, Kevin is a loving father and contributing member of society. He speaks openly about the events that day and his depression in the hopes that his story will inspire others. Suicide is not just something I've encountered on the job. It's personal. My grandfather committed suicide by poisoning. That act, although ending his own pain, robbed me from ever getting to know him. This is what suicide does. For most suicidal folks, or those contemplating suicide, they wouldn't think of hurting another person. They just want their own pain to end. Typically, this is accomplished in just 3 ways: sleep, drugs or alcohol, or death. In my career, I've responded to and been involved in hundreds of mental illness and suicide calls around the bridge. Of those incidents I've been directly involved with, I've only lost 2, but that's 2 too many. One was Jason. The other was a man I spoke to for about an hour. During that time, he shook my hand on 3 occasions. On that final handshake, he looked at me and he said, Kevin, I'm sorry, but I have to go. And he left. Horrible, absolutely horrible. I do want to tell you, though, the vast majority of folks that we do get to contact on that bridge do not commit suicide. Additionally, that very few who have jumped off the bridge and lived and can talk about it, that 1% to 2%, most of those folks have said that the second that they let go of that rail, they knew that they had made a mistake and they wanted to live. I tell people the bridge not only connects Marin to San Francisco, but people together also. That connection or bridge that we make is something that each and every one of us should strive to do. Suicide is preventable. There is help. There is hope. Thank you very much.
Wow, I have goosebumps all over me. Who would have thought that such a beautiful monument could cause tremendous grief? Unfortunately, it is a magnet for suicide.
I hope we are all now more conscious about these real life events. Take a moment and ask yourself what Kevin Briggs asked. What would you do if your family member, friend, or loved one was suicidal? What would you say? Would you know what to say?
Now, let's put a smile on our faces to welcome the Kettle Hunt sisters, Eleanor and Claire, who will amaze us with their passion for music with a song that tackles emotional distress, as Regina Franco discussed. Thank you.
Never tell. If teardrops could be bottles, there'd be swimming pools filled by models. Told a tight dress is what makes you alone. If I loved you was a promise, would you break it? If you're honest, tell the mirror what you know she's heard before. I don't wanna be you anymore. Hands getting cold, losing feelings, getting old. Was a made from a broken mold. Hurt, I can't shake. Reread every mistake. Only you know the way that I break. If teardrops could be bottled, there'd be swimming pools filled by models. Told a tight dress is what makes you alone. If I loved you was a promise, would you break it? If you're honest, tell the mirror what you know she's heard before. I don't wanna be you. I don't wanna be you. I don't wanna be you
I don't know you, Alan, but that got me crying.
That was great. Now, cousin, aren't you hungry?
Actually, I kind of am. Let's have a 20-minute break. Please use your ticket meal and exit carefully.
Uno, dos, tres, probando. Sí, sí.
Un, dos, tres. Sí, 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 sí. Yeah.
Please take your seats. The event is about to resume.
Thank you again for understanding and respecting the event's norms. Up next is Anastasia Ortiz, who will be talking about privilege.
Privilege. You mean the privileges he's had during his life? I heard he's proposing a plan that we should follow.
Yes, and how at many points he has taken them for granted. Let's listen to Anastasia's four-step plan about how everyone should recognize their privileges and how they should put them to the best use.
Mr. Anastasia Ortiz, the floor is yours.
Close your eyes and imagine you're in the starting line of a 400-meter dash. Boom! You hear a gunshot go off, and you immediately start running. You know you're not the fastest in your group. However, you reach the finish line before anyone else does. Weird, right? Then you look back and see that one of your competitors is running barefoot. The other one is blind, and the other one is missing a leg. This is the principle of privilege. According to the Oxford Dictionary, privilege is a special right, advantage, or immunity granted only to a particular person or group of people. Examples of privilege may include gender, race, socioeconomic, religious, sexual orientation, among many, many others. I fit into these 5 main examples as a person being favored, and I was practically born into it, meaning that none of them were my decisions. Privilege can play a role in our lives without us even noticing. I remember the particular day when my bubble burst. I was about 8 years old, and at that time I was my same competitive self. I used to play tennis back then, and I remember being frustrated. I would constantly go to tournaments and always lose. My goal at the time was to win the trophy. That was all I wanted, and it felt like I was constantly letting myself down. There was this boy in particular. To preserve anonymity, let's call him Marco, who I could never beat. He was a ball boy who spent most of his day in a court and therefore had lots of time to practice. Whenever I reached the finals of a tournament, it was against him, and he always won. Then, one day I was thrilled because I'd been practicing a lot and had reached the finals of this tournament, and it was against him. They called their game. 10 minutes passed, 20 minutes passed, 30 minutes passed, and he didn't show up. I ended up winning by default and received my first trophy. That moment that I had thought I would be excited and proud of myself, I was bothered by the fact that he didn't arrive. Later that week, I encountered him while I was practicing and curiously asked him why he missed our match. My heart sunk with his response. He had been working as a ball boy that morning. However, he did not earn enough money to pay a taxi fare to take him to the tournament. A taxi fare. An 8-year-old boy. That boy had to work for everything in his life, while I could have done whatever I pleased. This marked my life. Me, an upper-class 8-year-old who had never had to worry about money or transportation, was shocked that a boy slightly younger than me already had to provide for himself. This was a turning point in my life because I started acknowledging my privilege. I started noticing how people treated me differently and how easy things were for me because of the position I was born into, and how there were other people who had to work so hard for the things they had. This is what I like to call the first step to putting our privilege to good use, acknowledging it. This doesn't mean to brag about it or to show it off, but to simply be aware of what you have. Privilege, like everything else in life, comes and goes. One moment you can be at the top of the world, and the next you might be at rock bottom. For example, your family might suffer from a financial crisis from one day to another, and you might have to adjust to a new way of living. Personally, if I found myself in this situation, I would feel powerless because when I come to think about it, most of my daily activities, like going to school or simply eating lunch, might change. My school could become too expensive, and I might not have the money to eat what I like every day. That's when our dependency on privilege comes to play. If we think back to all the opportunities we've had, are all of them based on merit, or have they been swayed by our own privilege? And if they have been swayed, and we later lose that privilege, what does that mean for us? This is what we have to be conscious about. By a raise of hands, how many people have heard these words or a variation of them? Eat your food because there's a starving child in Africa. As a child, I didn't really find the relationship between these phrases. But later, as I grew up, I grasped the meaning. It was more than eating our food. It was about using the opportunities we have to create change. You have a school? Learn. You have a voice? Speak up. You have a platform? Stand up for what's right. Because it's always more than a starving African child. It's about the 821 million people who go to sleep hungry every day. The 264 million children who don't have access to education. And the 39,000 girls a day who are forced into child marriage. Once you grasp this like I did, you understand that you should always finish your food. You should always take advantage of your education. And that you should always speak up. If not for you, for those people who can't. Because we shouldn't only be appreciative of our privilege, we should act on it, embrace it, and consciously know what it means. Privilege is an unfair advantage that we use without consciously knowing. And we would be fools if we didn't use it. Emphasis in the word use, because there's a thin line between using privilege and abusing it. We should use our privilege to educate ourselves. As Nelson Mandela once said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Education is critical in this subject because what we know about privilege will impact what we do with it. Every opportunity that arises should be seized, and any chance that appears should be taken. The main obstacle people face when trying to succeed is justification. Excuses to justify where we fall short are merely a way of complaining. How many times have we blamed our misfortunes on someone else's success? The same principle applies for privilege. You can't say that you don't have it because you're privileged by having a family and by being able to read, by having the ability to walk, or by simply being alive. You cannot deny that you have some kind of privilege, the same as you cannot deny that some people might have more or less than you. However, we cannot start playing the blaming game. We cannot blame one specific person or group of people. It's a system, part of our society that is to blame for these injustices. Because privilege, despite its connotation, is not always positive. The same way you can use privilege to your advantage, you can also misuse it or not use it at all. I attend one of the best private schools in Nicaragua, and I've heard so many people say, why should I study, go to school or college, if my parents already have enough money to provide for me for the rest of my life? These privileged counterproductive thoughts are what lead to the misusages of privilege. How many artists have lost themselves and their fortunes in drugs and alcohol? How many people have misused their talents in exchange for money? How many people are unaware or simply ignorant to their own privilege? So, what should we do with our free time? Well, one of the best advices I can give you is to educate yourself. Anytime you have some time off, learn about all the privileges you have. Personally, what I did was to join the debate club, in which we acted as heads of different countries, combining our efforts to solve global and regional problems. And many times we discussed topics like racism, sexism, prejudice, and human rights. What I learned from these debates was that more often than not, governments around the world didn't have the major influence. The public did. This realization made me aware that the attitude and actions of individuals, like me and you, as a collective, are far more impactful than those of an imposing entity, because rules are nothing if no one follows them. Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote a book called The Social Contract, where he points out that we all have different capabilities. Then he goes on and states that each member of the community gives himself to it at the moment of its foundation, saying that whether we like it or not, we are part of a group larger than ourselves. And that with every community, there has to be some type of commitment from its members. Commitment in our communities should be a way of helping out the people who need it the most. I classify these into two categories: money and time. Money, which is the way most people give back by putting money in a can or writing a big check to a foundation, does help out. I'm not going to say it doesn't. But it's like Tracy Kidder says in his book, Mountains Beyond Mountains. The world is full of miserable places. One way of living comfortably is not to think about them, or when you do, to send money. Meaning that by sending money, we get the satisfaction of helping out by distancing ourselves from the problem. To avoid this, there is the other category: time. Time, which is a less sought after way of giving back, is often the most effective. Activities like volunteering have a greater impact on the community and help the volunteer become aware of problems that would otherwise be overlooked. Now, I'm not saying to stop donating to charity, because to make change, money is essential most of the time. My goal is for you to become aware. So know where your money is going, learn about the problem at hand, and maybe find a more personal way of helping out that cause. Because in this ever expanding world, it is easy to lose focus on why we're helping. And that's when we have to ask ourselves, are we doing it for the people we're serving, or to feel good about ourselves? And to all the busy people out there with no time to spare, what are you prioritizing? Your comfort? Now, we all have different outlooks on life. The way I see it is as an opportunity to make things better than they were handed to us by our ancestors. And the only way I see that happening is if we take some time off from thinking about ourselves and use that time for the common well-being. I'll give you an example. I am a very busy person who enjoys being occupied, and therefore it is not always easy to find time to give back. After some searching, I found my remedy. There is such a thing called service learning, where students learn through service. Last year, my human geography class took a field trip to Fabreto, an organization that helps distribute food to those people who cannot provide it for themselves, while learning about food insecurity inside the classroom. Also, in my Catholic formation class, we went to mission to rural parts of Nicaragua in order to reach the people who would normally be unreachable. Because of these innovative ways of learning, occupied students such as me were able to experience service while also learning about theoretical content that would otherwise be distant. That is why I encourage teachers to engage students in these innovative ways of learning to help them serve our community, and students to advocate for their community and take the initiative to serve others, which would be the final step to using our privilege for a purpose that benefited those who lack the opportunities to thrive alone. There are 4 steps to using our privilege and putting it to good use. First, acknowledge your privilege. Let yourself know that and be modest about it. Second, appreciate it, and never take it for granted. Learn to use it, but don't depend on it. Third, take advantage of it and educate yourself. Learn to use it, but don't abuse it. And most importantly, prioritize and serve others by letting them have the same opportunities you've had. You win the race. But after realizing the unfairness of it, you begin to acknowledge your privilege. But you go visit the three other people you raced with. And to the barefoot one, you give him new shoes. To the blind one, you help her run in a straight line. And to the one missing a leg, you help him build a prosthetic limb to run with. And the next time you race, it will be a fair race in which you might not win. But as American boxer Mark Muro said, life is not about winning the race. Life is about finishing that race and how many people we can help finish this race. Thank you.
What a great talk. It really put things into perspective, huh? I hope that from now on we stop taking opportunities for granted.
I never thought about other things I have in life and how privileged I am to have them. I'll definitely be putting my privilege to good use from now on.
Let's welcome volunteer coordinator Isabela Serna, who will lead our second breakout session, A Privileged Stand.
The privilege stand is designed to help acknowledge your societal privileges. I will read to you a list of 20 social privileges or disadvantages. Please stand up if you identify with the following statements or keep seated if you do not. Please sit down after every statement, and those who are not seated, please do so. If you are able to move through the world without the fear of sexual assault. If you agree with this statement, please stand up. Please be seated. Okay. If you agree with this statement I'm about to read, you can stand up. If you don't agree with it, please stay seated. If you come from a supportive family environment. Please be seated. If you have ever tried to change your speech or mannerisms to gain credibility. Please be seated. If you were ever embarrassed about your clothes or house while growing up. If you can make mistakes and not have people attribute your behavior to flaws in your racial/gender background. Yes. If you can make mistakes and not have people attribute your behavior to flaws in your racial/gender background. Group, sorry. Please be seated. If you felt like you had adequate access to healthy food growing up. Please be seated. If you are reasonably sure you would be hired for a job based on your ability and qualifications. Please be seated. If you would never think twice about calling the police when trouble occurs. You agree with that? If you can see a doctor whenever you feel the need. Please be seated. If you feel comfortable being emotionally expressive slash open. Please be seated. If you get time off for your religious holidays. If you get time off for your religious holidays. Please be seated. If you feel comfortable walking home alone at night. If you have ever traveled outside Nicaragua. Please be seated. If you feel confident that your parents would be able to financially help slash support you if you were going through a financial hardship. Please be seated. If you have ever been bullied or made fun of based on something you cannot change. Please be seated. If you studied the culture or the history of your ancestors in elementary school. Please be seated. If your parents or guardians attended college. Please be seated. If you were ever offered a job or opportunity because of your association with a friend or family member. Please be seated. Thank you.
Dear audience, we would appreciate if you would turn off your cell phones and do not leave the theater while a talk or an activity is in motion. Thank you.
So during that break, this breakout session was very interesting. It was certainly a privilege to do it.
Now, John Green, an American author, blogger, producer, and educator, will talk about the importance of learning no matter your age.
Is this the guy who makes the long and fast-paced episodes?
Yes, and the author of Looking for Alaska, The Fault in Our Stars. Sit back and enjoy what this legend has to say.
This is a map of New York State that was made in 1937 by the General Drafting Company. It's an extremely famous map among cartography nerds because down here at the bottom of the Catskill Mountains, there is a little town called Roscoe. Actually, this will go easier if I just put it up here. There's Roscoe, and then right above Roscoe is Rockland, New York, and then right above that is the tiny town of Agloe, New York. Agloe, New York is very famous to cartographers because it's a paper town. It's also known as a copyright trap. Map makers, because my map of New York and your map of New York are going to look very similar on account of the shape of New York. Often, map makers will insert fake places onto their maps in order to protect their copyright, because then, if my fake place shows up on your map, I can be well and truly sure that you have robbed me. Agloe is a Scrabbleization of the initials of the two guys who made this map, Ernest G. Alpers and Otto Lindbergh, and they released this map in 1937. Decades later, Rand McNally releases a map with Agloe, New York on it at the same exact intersection of two dirt roads in the middle of nowhere. Well, you can imagine the delight over at General Drafting. They immediately call Rand McNally and they say, we've caught you. We made Agloe, New York up. It is a fake place. It's a paper town. We're going to sue your pants off. And Rand McNally says, no, 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 no. Agloe is real. Because people kept going to that intersection of two dirt roads in the middle of nowhere, expecting there to be a place called Agloe, someone built a place called Agloe, New York. It had a gas station, a general store, 2 houses at its peak. And this is, of course, a completely irresistible metaphor to a novelist, because we would all like to believe that the stuff that we write down on paper can change the actual world in which we're actually living, which is why my third book is called Paper Towns. But what interests me ultimately more than the medium in which this happened is the phenomenon itself. It's easy enough to say that the world shapes our maps of the world, right? Like the overall shape of the world is obviously going to affect our maps. But what I find a lot more interesting is the way that the manner in which we map the world changes the world. Because the world would truly be a different place if North were down. And the world would be a truly different place if Alaska and Russia weren't on opposite sides of the map. And the world would be a different place if we projected Europe to show it in its actual size. The world is changed by our maps of the world. The way that we choose to sort of our personal cartographic enterprise also shapes the map of our lives, and that in turn shapes our lives. I believe that what we map changes the life we lead. And I don't mean that in some like secrety Oprah's Angels Network, like you can think your way out of cancer sense. But I do believe that while maps don't show you where you will go in your life, they show you where you might go. You very rarely go to a place that isn't on your personal map. So I was a really terrible student when I was a kid. My GPA was consistently in the low 2s. And I think the reason that I was such a terrible student is that I felt like education was just a series of hurdles that had been erected before me and that I had to jump over in order to achieve adulthood. And I didn't really want to jump over these hurdles because they seemed completely arbitrary, so I often wouldn't. And then people would threaten me, they'd threaten me with this going on my permanent record, or you'll never get a good job. I didn't want a good job. As far as I could tell, at 11 or 12 years old, like people with good jobs woke up very early in the morning. And the men who had good jobs, one of the first things they did was tie a strangulation item of clothing around their necks. They literally put nooses on themselves and then they went off to their jobs, whatever they were. That's not a recipe for a happy life. These people, in my like symbol-obsessed 12-year-old imagination, these people who are strangling themselves as one of the first things they do each morning, they can't possibly be happy. Why would I want to jump over all of these hurdles and have that be the end? That's a terrible end. And then, when I was in 10th grade, I went to this school, Indian Springs School, a small boarding school outside of Birmingham, Alabama. And all at once, I became a learner. And I became a learner because I found myself in a community of learners. I found myself surrounded by people who celebrated intellectualism and engagement and who thought that my ironic, oh so cool disengagement wasn't clever or funny, but like it was a simple and unspectacular response to very complicated and compelling problems. And so I started to learn because learning was cool. I learned that some infinite sets are bigger than other infinite sets, and I learned what iambic pentameter is and why it sounds so good to human ears. I learned that the Civil War was a nationalizing conflict. I learned some physics. I learned that correlation shouldn't be confused with causation. All of these things, by the way, enrich my life on a literally daily basis. And it's true that I don't use most of them for my job, but that's not what it's about for me. It's about cartography. What is the process of cartography? It's, sailing upon some land and thinking, I think I'll draw that bit of land. And then wondering, maybe there's some more land to draw. And that's where learning really began for me. It's true that I had teachers that didn't give up on me, and I was very fortunate to have those teachers because I often gave them cause to think there was no reason to invest in me. But a lot of the learning that I did in high school wasn't about what happened inside the classroom. It was about what happened outside of the classroom. For instance, I can tell you that there's a certain slant of light winter afternoons that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes, not because I memorized Emily Dickinson in school when I was in high school, but because there was a girl when I was in high school, and her name was Amanda, and I had a crush on her, and she liked Emily Dickinson poetry. The reason I can tell you what opportunity cost is because one day when I was playing Super Mario Kart on my couch, my friend Emmett walked in and he said, "How long have you been playing Super Mario Kart?" And I said, "I don't know, like 6 hours." And he said, "You realize that if you'd worked at Baskin Robbins those 6 hours, you could have made $30. So in some ways, you just paid $30 to play Super Mario Kart." And I was like, "I'll take that deal." But I learned what opportunity cost is. And along the way, the map of my life got better. It got bigger. It contained more places. There were more things that might happen, more futures I might have. It wasn't a formal, organized learning process, and I'm happy to admit that. It was spotty, it was inconsistent, there was a lot I didn't know. I might know, that Cantor's idea that some infinite sets are larger than other infinite sets, but I didn't really understand the calculus behind that idea. I might know the idea of opportunity cost, but I didn't know the law of diminishing returns. But the great thing about imagining learning as cartography, instead of imagining it as arbitrary hurdles that you have to jump over, is that you see a bit of coastline, and that makes you want to see more. And so now I do know at least some of the calculus that underlies all of that stuff. So I had one learning community in high school, then I went to another for college, and then I went to another when I started working at a magazine called Booklist, where I was an assistant surrounded by astonishingly well-read people. And then I wrote a book, and like all authors dream of doing, I promptly quit my job. And for the first time since high school, I found myself without a learning community, and it was miserable. I hated it. I read many, many books during this 2-year period. I read books about Stalin, and I read books about how the Uzbek people came to identify as Muslims, and I read books about how to make atomic bombs. But it just felt like I was creating my own hurdles and then jumping over them myself instead of feeling the excitement of being part of a community of learners, a community of people who are engaged together in the cartographic enterprise of trying to better understand and map the world around us. And then in 2006, I met that guy named Zay Frank. I didn't actually meet him, just on the internet. Zay Frank was running, at the time, a show called The Show with Zay Frank, and I discovered this show, and that was my way back into being a community learner again. Here's Zay talking about Las Vegas.
Las Vegas was built in the middle of a huge hot desert. Almost everything here was brought from somewhere else. The sort of rocks, the trees, the waterfalls. These fish are almost as out of place as my pig that flew. Contrasted to the scorching desert that surrounds this place, so are these people. Things from all over the world have been rebuilt here, away from their histories and away from the people that experience them differently. Sometimes improvements were made. Even the Sphinx got a nose job. Here, what you see is what you get, and there's no reason to feel like you're missing anything. This New York means the same to me as it does to everyone else. Everything is out of context, and that means context allows for everything. Self-parking event center, Shark Reef. This fabrication of place could be one of the world's greatest achievements because no one belongs here, everyone does. As I walked around this morning, I noticed most of the buildings were huge mirrors reflecting the sun back into the desert. But unlike most mirrors, which present you with an outside view of yourself embedded in a place, these mirrors come back empty.
Makes me nostalgic for the days when you could see the pixels in online video. Zay isn't just a great public intellectual, he's also a brilliant community builder, and the community of people that built up around these videos was in many ways a community of learners. So we played Zay Frank at chess collaboratively and we beat him. We organized ourselves to take a young man on a road trip across the United States. We turned the earth into a sandwich by having one person hold a piece of bread at one point on the earth, and on the exact opposite point of the earth have another person holding a piece of bread. I realize that these are silly ideas, but they are also learny ideas.
And that was what was so exciting to me. And if you go online, you can find communities like this all over the place. Follow the calculus tag on Tumblr, and yes, you will see people complaining about calculus, but you'll also see people reblogging those complaints, making the argument that calculus is interesting and beautiful, and here's a way into thinking about the problem that you find unsolvable. You can go to places like Reddit and find subreddits like Ask a Historian or Ask Science, where you can ask people who are in these fields a wide range of questions, from very serious ones to very silly ones. But to me, the most interesting communities of learners that are growing up on the internet right now are on YouTube. And admittedly, I am biased. But I think in a lot of ways, the YouTube page resembles a classroom. Look, for instance, at Minute Physics, a guy who is teaching the world about physics.
Let's cut to the chase. As of July 4th, 2012, the Higgs boson is the last fundamental piece of the standard model of particle physics to be discovered experimentally. But you might ask, why was the Higgs boson included in the standard model alongside well-known particles like electrons and photons and quarks if it hadn't been discovered back then in the 1970s? Good question. There are two main reasons. First, just like the electron is an excitation in the electron field, the Higgs boson is simply a particle which is an excitation of the everywhere permeating Higgs field. The Higgs field, in turn, plays an integral role in our model for the weak nuclear force. In particular, the Higgs field helps explain why it's so weak. We'll talk more about this in a later video, but even though weak nuclear theory was confirmed in the 1980s, in the equations, the Higgs field is so inextricably jumbled with the weak force that until now we've been unable to confirm its actual and independent existence.
Or here's a video that I made as part of my show Crash Course, talking about World War I.
The immediate cause was, of course, the assassination in Sarajevo of the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand on June 28, 1914, by a Bosnian Serb nationalist named Gavrilo Princip. Quick aside, it's worth noting that the first big war of the 20th century began with an act of terrorism. So Franz Ferdinand wasn't particularly well liked by his uncle, the Emperor Franz Joseph. Now that is a mustache. But even so, the assassination led Austria to issue an ultimatum to Serbia, whereupon Serbia accepted some but not all of Austria's demands, leading Austria to declare war against Serbia. And then Russia, due to its alliance with the Serbs, mobilized its army. Germany, because it had an alliance with Austria, told Russia to stop mobilizing, which Russia failed to do. So then Germany mobilized its own army, declared war on Russia, cemented an alliance with the Ottomans, and then
That was beautiful. Thank you, Fatima and Mr. Spiro.
Yes, so who do we have next?
We have Andrea Farage with her talk about personal growth. We all have had moments in our lives where we have felt bad about ourselves, felt insecure, and simply felt that we were irrelevant. But today, we will learn how to get out of this hole.
With her personal story, Andrea will tell us about the problems she used to have with herself and how she managed to overcome those problems and become the great person she is today.
Please give a round of applause for Andrea Farage.
I am a student of philosophy, a person who has too many questions with not enough answers. As such, I have a question for you. Where are you? Take it literally or dive deeper. Are you where you want to be? Now ask yourself another question. Why are you there? Each one of us has limits that prevent us from reaching our true potential. But these boundaries are able to be broken through a proper shift in mentality and a purification of our environment. However, the real question is, what are you willing to sacrifice? And what changes are you willing to make in order to reach your desired destination? My harsh path began in middle school. In eighth grade, when I made a substantial mistake, I tried to fit in with the wrong group of people. In a brief period of time, my surroundings changed remarkably, disrupting my focus and changing my mindset. If I'm honest, I was bothered by how they were constantly classifying people according to their social status. And although I was different and internally judged them, in a matter of months, I became a reflection of them. Because in fact, your environment and your circle of friends shape who you are. My first notable transformation was in academics. At this point, I didn't care at all about school. I recall turning in projects 2 weeks late, if I even bother to turn them in at all. I never studied for tests, and every day when coming home from school, I wouldn't take my backpack out of the car. I lived by with not a single drop of ambition that inspired me to get out of bed every morning. My second transformation was in athletics. My body evolved unhealthily, gaining so much weight because I was sedentary. I was 5 feet 10 and really overweight. So people began to call me names like Fat Mammoth or Fat Giraffe. How does that even work? I started to compare my physical appearance to other girls. And yes, they were different. Few were 6 feet tall in Nicaragua, where according to Nation Master, the average is barely 5'2". But different doesn't mean better. Different just means different. But I didn't know this. And I became so self-conscious that I would skip my physical education class for months to avoid running in shorts. And it was at this time that the guy I liked texted my friend, describing me as obese and ugly, even saying that my legs were disgusting. Socially, I drowned in an ocean full of insecurities, and I adapted what I call the mentality of average. Now that I'm not in this facet of my life anymore, I always wonder, why did I care so much? Why did I used to crave this validation? The answer, I was in an awful environment. Trying to find me somewhere else, I lost the real me to other people because I feared rejection. And to make a long story short, I hated myself. And I had fallen into the sharp claws of depression. Unlike some, I was lucky. The people I proudly call friends today helped me heal my drowned spirit by believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. They forced me to rise up when I hit rock bottom. And right now, I want to challenge you to believe in someone else and to inspire a person to exploit their potential and wake up to life like I did. When I realized the universal truth, you are what you want to be, I flipped my whole life around and I reinvented myself. But there was something missing in this phrase nobody told me. You are not what you want to be. but you are what you do to get to where you want. This realization was the beginning of my shift from one side of the spectrum to the other. But before I reveal my before and after, let me tell you the three-step process. Theodore Roosevelt once said, "Believe you can, and you're halfway there." And this takes us to the first step to accomplishing what you aspire, applying the power of belief. This means that you set a target that others would classify as unrealistic because you know that your beliefs create your reality. It is not the lack of skills or intelligence that stops you, rather the lack of trust on yourself. That is how a champion's mind works. But what are the characteristics of the mind of a champion? A believer has an inner monologue every day to reinforce the notion that one is capable of anything. A dreamer grasps the idea that the future is a collection of presents and understands that the present is all there is. A visionary visualizes every day the moment where they shake hands with their dreams, at times feeling it so strongly that they can distinguish their vision from the reality. And an optimist knows that passion keeps humans alive by delivering a sense of purpose. They don't sabotage their mind before even trying. Now, let's put all this together and ask yourself, do I have the mind of a champion? But what is the psychological standpoint regarding this philosophy? The psychologist Carol Dweck coined the terms fixed and growth mindset. A person with a fixed mindset believes that their intelligence and capacities are fixed traits. Therefore, they cannot be expanded, not even with effort, because they have an external locus of control. On the other hand, the human with a growth mindset knows that their intelligence and abilities can be improved with effort and dedication. They have an internal locus of control. For instance, let's imagine two high school students. They both took the SATs and scored poorly. The thoughts of the first student are, "I'm a failure, and I'll never be good enough." And the second student thinks, "This is not what I wanted, but it must have been my strategy. And this doesn't measure my intelligence because it's a standardized test." Do you see the difference? The first one is a pessimist, and the second is an optimist. Indeed, you are the master of your sea. So liberate your mind from this vicious monster now. Your brain is incredibly malleable. This is backed up by recent discoveries in neuroscience. Brain plasticity is a fascinating phenomenon of the brain's ability to mold its own structure according to external environments and repetitive practices. Neurons literally change with experience because our brain is adaptable. For this reason, I stated earlier, your environment shapes who you are. This proves how our neural networks can expand by making good choices and nurturing our seeds of thought and curiosity. Basically, plant a strong sense of belief in the right mindset and harvest your new reality, which is now. And mark these words: if my mind can conceive it and my heart can believe it, then I can achieve it. From the great Muhammad Ali, because every innovation begins in your mind. It is the fruit of an idea. In talking about environments, let's move further to the second step to building up the mind of a champion: the power of social environments. The people you surround yourself with will leave a bold print on your identity. This is why you have to choose your squad wisely. Abusive and dysfunctional friends act like a circular blockade that prevents you from reflecting your ideas to the world. They are creativity killers, and somehow they manipulate us and make us believe that their opinions actually matter when they don't. Why do we listen to them? Because they shout out pessimism every time we let our music out, and then we cannot hear our own voice. The impact that our social world has on us shows that emotions are contagious. I surrounded myself with ambitious individuals after almost failing all my classes, and the simple contact with them made me ambitious. If you're in touch with friends that are insightful and always questioning the pure nature of existence, you will also begin to question. I know that because I am that philosophical friend. Now my friends are also beginning to question. James H. Fowler, a social scientist from Harvard College, performed a study concerning the spread of happiness in a community for 20 years. He found out that humans who were in a place where happiness was a predominant emotion we're more likely to become infected with this feeling. Even the physical distance made a difference. The statistics showed that those who had a happy person within a mile were 25% more likely to become joyful too. And those with a positive next door neighbor had a 34% probability. The less distance, the higher the chances of sharing this contagious emotion. So now, ask yourself, what kind of feelings are your friends transmitting to you? Additionally, the link between our friends and ourselves strengthens when it comes to exploiting our talents. It is easier to believe in our potential when we have other people around us who encourage us to keep fighting. In fact, healthy friendships benefit us in three key ways: boosting our self confidence, developing interpersonal skills, and broadening our horizons. Firstly, these great individuals build up our self esteem because they enrich our lives with positivity and increase the sense of belonging, something we all crave. Imagine having a major trouble that brings you waves of anxiety. How would you feel if you had no one to talk to? A friend has the power to revive your inner peace by creating a human shelter where you support each other mutually when saying, I believe in you. Secondly, these relationships develop our interpersonal intelligence. In other words, effective interaction with other people. Being able to communicate effectively can have long term benefits, since this skill plays a vital role in your professional career progress. It opens a window for opportunities where you can trade ideas and close deals. And most importantly, it is the ability of successful communication that creates every leader. And lastly, these powerful bonds broaden our mindset. When sharing with a friend, you exchange perspectives, gaining empathy. You may have a really practical friend, an overachiever, or a mystical one. And each one will teach you something that will serve you at some point in your life. And when you all unite, you merge these diverse ideas in a melting pot, feeding a wiser mind. So when you possess the right mindset and belong to the right social environment, burning instincts will emerge in you, and you'll take actions that will drive you to your wished destinations. The first two steps in a way set the fertile soil and the season for your seeds to flourish. This leaves us in the last step of the process: the power of instinct versus intuition. These are the following definitions of the terms according to the Cambridge Dictionary. Jean-Luc Bossonald, an award-winning entrepreneur, classifies intuition and instinct into categories of intelligence. At the bottom, he places our instincts as the lowest form of intelligence because they are focused on survival and sex. At the top, he places intuition, which is more about our feelings and creativity. We need to master the art of balance between both of these because we can't fully trust our instincts like animals, and we can't always place logic aside. But it's essential that your intuition is always activated because the answer to most of your questions are inside of you. Dr. Judith Orloff, an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at UCLA, claims that her patients see it as a superpower for proper leadership. When something is off with a person or place, your intuition wakes up all the nerve cells in your body to warn you. It is like having knowledge, but before knowing. To harness this power, it is essential that your intuition is always activated. And always ask yourself, is what I'm feeling irrational fear or intuition? And evaluate the characteristics of your emotion. According to Orlov, if it's intuition, this sentiment should be focused on your present. It is neutral in emotion and it feels expansive. Meanwhile, fear focuses on your past wounds. It is too emotional and it feels restrictive. In essence, allow yourself to be guided by the real professor, intuition. But don't let doubt interfere with it. Remember, Franklin Roosevelt said, the only thing you should fear is fear itself. Do you see how the steps of this process are all interconnected? You can't have a growth mindset without a supportive environment. And you can't have wonderful relationships without listening to your intuition about people. Your intuition will guide you to find the friends you need to reinforce the right mindset that will lead you to meet your targets. Combine the three powers: a growth mindset, a positive environment, and an active intuition, and reboot yourself. Become the power, the most dynamic version of you. And now, Going back to myself, this is how the process transformed me. In academics, remember the girl who was failing all her classes? Now, she's the same one that strives for a perfect GPA, wants to apply to the top colleges, and that receives recognition for her grades and dedication. In athletics, the girl who skipped a semester of PE class and that was called the Fat Giraffe became the track and field captain, a national title holder, and a Central American medalist. And socially, the girl who craved others' validation for the first time stopped caring. She stares at her reflection and finally sees herself, especially loving her height. And she didn't change, she became herself. But for me, this is just the start because I am still building my mind of a champion. And all this started not because I believed in myself, because I didn't, but because someone showed me how to think differently. And I'm grateful for you. You know who you are. So now, besides following all this process for you, I dare you to believe in someone else. Because believing in someone else is what truly makes you a believer. Thank you.
What an inspiring story by Andrea Farage. It really makes you think anything is possible if you set your mind to it.
Yes, awesome talk given by an awesome person. Thank you, Andrea, for a really inspiring change.
Anyhow, we are approaching the end of this TEDx. Thank you, speakers, team leaders, and volunteer staff for putting together a great event once again. Thank you, everyone, for your sacrifice and dedication over the last months. Last but not least, let's welcome Maria Cobos, the organizer of this event, to give her closing remarks. Until next time.
Okay, I want to thank our wonderful team, not only the speakers that worked very hard, but also every volunteer coordinator, every production leader, like Isabella Dashon and Mr. Medrano, that made this possible. I also want to thank the teachers, like Ms. Larson and Mr. Preston, that allowed us to lead without no letting while letting us know that they were there to support us. And most of all, I want to thank our audience because without you, this wouldn't be possible. So thank you. It's over. Like.